Hello, welcome to my thought for the day. I do hope you had a wonderful day yesterday and were truly blessed as you celebrated and rejoiced in the amazing story of Christmas. I want to read I think it's 4 verses that start the book of Hebrews. Let me read them to you. In many and various ways, God spoke of old to our fathers by the prophets. But in these last days, he has spoken to us by a Son, whom he appointed the heir of all things, through whom also he created the world. He reflects the glory of God and bears the very stamp of his nature, upholding the universe by his word of power. When he'd made purification for sins, he sat down at the right hand of the Majesty on high, having become as much superior to angels as the name he has obtained is more excellent than theirs. Angels figure a lot, don't they, in the Christmas story? It's quite amazing when you read the whole of the scriptures. Angels appear quite a lot in Genesis and early parts of the Old Testament, but not very frequently at all. Then in Daniel, we see 2 angels involved, Gabriel coming to Daniel with a message from God, and Michael, the archangel, fighting to help Gabriel get through to speak to Daniel. And then at the beginning of the New Testament, the angels are very busy because the climax of the planning of God, the time has arrived. And we know from the prophecies about the second coming of Jesus that angels will be heavily involved in that as well, blowing the trumpet, heralding the coming, the return of the King. But in our generation, there are many people who have elevated angels above where they would want to be. Angels do not want to be worshipped. Angels are like us in one sense, in that we are meant to be, and they are meant to be, servants of God, going about doing his will. It says at the end of this first chapter, referring to angels, are they not all ministering spirits sent forth to serve for the sake of those who are to obtain salvation? Angels do the will of God. Unfortunately, our arch enemy, Satan, is a fallen angel. That's why he can act like he's something really wonderful. And he can mislead us because he looks beautiful. Now, our parody of Satan is dressing him in red and giving him horns and a tail. But actually, the scripture doesn't support that view of him, except in Revelation when he's called a dragon. And he's a serpent in Genesis. But he's actually in disguise. He is an angel, a fallen angel, and he fell from heaven with his own subservient angels. So we need to be careful about angels and not elevate them above their station. They were as thrilled at the coming of the Messiah as the people they were speaking to were thrilled. The angels came with great joy, bursting through heaven, through the realms of heaven, to tell the world, to tell those shepherds, to tell the story that the baby had been born. And the focus of the scriptures is not angels, is not Satan, is not man. The focus of the scriptures is Jesus. And these verses give him his proper place. It says here that in many and various ways God spoke to his people of old by the prophets. He spoke in lots of ways, didn't he? He speaks through the firmament. We've seen that in some of the Psalms. He speaks through what he's made. He speaks through the events of history. But he spoke much more clearly through the prophets, giving them his words to speak to the people they ministered to. And they weren't listened to. They were despised. They were thrown out, rejected, ignored by God's own people, largely. And Jesus had the same experience of being rejected by the religious leaders of his own people, who should have known better, who should have recognized who he was. But in these last days, God has spoken to us by a Son, whom he appointed the heir of all things, through whom also he created the world. This tells you who Jesus is and where he is. He is seated at the right hand of God. He is the heir of all things. He is the Son. He is the inheritor. He is the one. And yet, mysteriously, everything was made through him. John says that, doesn't he? And we read that yesterday. Through him all things were made, and without him was not anything made that was made. Everything has been made by him. He created all things. He reflects the glory of God. John said that. We beheld his glory, the glory as of the only begotten Son of the Father, full of grace and truth. The glory of God is in Jesus. If you want to know what God is like, look at Jesus. Jesus said to his own disciples, if you've seen me, you've seen the Father. I and the Father are one. The mystery of the Trinity. Jesus, the very nature of God in him, in this man that walked the earth. And then this phrase, upholding the universe by his word of power. That's something else to think about. You know, if everything around us is not perpetually sustained, it hasn't been sort of wound up and let go. It is sustained all the time by Jesus. Without him, everything that we know would collapse in on itself. The universe would disappear, would collapse, would implode. That's the word. I'm trying to think of the right word. Everything we know would go, would disappear. Jesus is the center of everything. He's the center of time. He's the center of life. He's the center of God's purpose. Jesus is the center. And because he lives, we can live too. And we can face tomorrow because we know that he holds us in his hands. And then when he'd made purification for sins, he sat down at the right hand of the Majesty on high. When Jesus completed his work, he said, it is finished. When he rose, he stayed a while, 40 days. Then he ascended into heaven. And now he is seated at the right hand of God. There is a man in heaven, the God-man Jesus. He has taken our nature into heaven and he is seated. He is seated because he hasn't got any more work to do. He has done it. He is seated at the right hand of God, waiting for that moment when God tells him to come back, and then he will return. And he is far superior to everything, including the greatest angels of all. He is superior to everything. It is at his feet today that we worship, and we acknowledge this amazing person who came, who submitted to the will of his Father, who came and did everything right, and then gave himself up for us. What a wonderful message that we don't need to do anything to be saved except that Jesus did it for us and give him the worship due to his magnificent person. Hebrews 1. Oh, and those of you who wondered about the poem I read yesterday, I did post it up in the description of yesterday's thought for the day. Somebody asked for it. It's in the description on yesterday's thought for the day if you wanted a copy of it. God bless you. Have a great day. Bye-bye.